What's up, everybody? Wanted to do a Bible study about Jonah. The last Bible study I did was about Joseph and how his life had a lot of interesting parallels to Jesus' life. So I did that last time, and I want to do similar thing to Jonah. I want to jump into Jonah and talk about that. The Before I do that, though, I want to start with Matthew, where Jesus actually compares himself to Jonah. So if you go to Matthew chapter 12, verse 38, then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Then the men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. And so you see how Jesus is hinting at something else here in regards to how he compares the people that he's dealing with there to Nineveh. So it probably makes sense to look at Jonah and see what is being talked about here. Um, I also think it's important to understand that he's saying to them a couple things. He's saying, I know what you're planning, that you're going to your desire is to kill me, which is interesting because they're asking for a sign. So he goes, I'm going to give you a sign, and it's going to be after you kill me. um, I'm going to be 3 days in that tomb. And it's also interesting, doesn't say he's going to rise again, but with the idea of Jonah, um, Jonah comes out as a sign that Jonah's from God. And so here these Jews are, um, these specific Jews, these Pharisees, not believing that Jesus is who he said he is and that he's from God. And so they obviously would hold Jonah in high regard. And um, so it's just interesting. So let's discuss Jonah here. So if we go to Jonah chapter 1, verse 1, it says, Now the word of Adonai came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Rise, go to the great city Nineveh, and call out to her, for her evil has risen before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of Adonai. So uh, it's interesting here, right? I think a couple things that is right off the bat. So Jesus is talking to Jewish people, and he's saying to them how um, these specific Pharisees, he's saying to them, you guys, he's hinting at them that they're disobedient to the Lord. And the very first thing you see Jonah doing is being disobedient to the Lord. I think it's an interesting thing to point out here. And so what happens then is that Jonah boards a boat to get to go to Tarshish, and then verse 4 picks up. Then Adonai hurled a forceful wind into the sea, and there was such a mighty storm on the sea that the ship was about to shatter. So the sailors were afraid and cried out, each man to his own god. Then they cast the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it. And isn't it interesting that when we go through trials, we don't care so much about the goods that the pleasures of life that we thought we cared so much about. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest part of the ship to lay down and fell fast asleep. So notice this too. Here's an interesting corollary to Jesus, because you remember there was that scene in the Gospels where Jesus was in the back of the boat asleep while there was a storm, and the disciples, also sailors by the way. So that's an interesting corollary, because they're sailors who, they were fishermen. They were used to being out on the sea. So there was something about that storm that made them think this is the type of storm that can take you out. And here you have some sailors as well who are very experienced with the sea and knew this storm was not just your average storm. So there's an interesting corollary to start that with, right? So it continues, verse 6, it says, "The chief sailor came near to him and said to him, 'What, are you sleeping? Get up, call out to your God. Perhaps the gods will consider us so we will not perish.' Then each man said to his companion, 'Come, let's cast lots, so we may know because of whom this evil is happening to us.' So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, 'Tell us now, on whose account is this evil happening to us? What is your profession, and where do you come from? What is your land, and what nation are you from?' He said to them, 'I am a Hebrew, and I fear Adonai, God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land.' Then the men became afraid with an overwhelming fear, and they said to him, 'What have you done?' For the men knew that he had fled from the presence of Adonai because he had told them. So they said to him, 'What should we do to you so the sea will become calm for us?' For the storm was raging on. 'Pick me up and throw me into the sea,' he said to them. 'Then the sea will become calm for you, for I know it is because of me that this great storm is upon you.' Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to return to the land, but they could not, because the sea kept raging against them. So they cried to Adonai and said, 'Please, Adonai, do not let us perish on account of the soul of this man, and don't put innocent blood on us. For you, Adonai, have done as you pleased.' So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stilled from its raging. Then the men became afraid with an overwhelming fear of Adonai, and they offered a sacrifice to Adonai and made vows." So, right off the bat, this little section here is a corollary that strongly represents the Jesus narrative, because understand that in this boat is all Gentile nations, figuratively, right? Different gods, different cultures, all together. The one guy that gets thrown into the sea is the Jew. That's what the whole gospel is. That Jesus came into the world to be sacrificed on behalf not of just the Jews, but the whole world. And so you see that microcosm here in this part of Jonah. And you also see that the fear of Adonai spreads to these Gentiles after the death of this Jew. And so Jesus, the fear of the one true God, the worship of the one true God begins to spread throughout the world because of Jesus. And so right there you have this interesting corollary that takes place right here. So, and this part here is what everybody's familiar with in regards to Jonah. So Jonah gets tossed into the ocean, and this is where the fish gets him. Now Adonai prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And here you go with what Jesus was talking about. And this is all to get Jonah back to get to Nineveh. So, there's probably something that'll preach right there. God's going to get his work done, right? I mean, he's going to get it done. And it doesn't matter what we want, right? I mean, in the Joseph narrative, there was that part at the end where Joseph says to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. So, the other thing too is that what ends up happening here is that there's a prayer. So Jonah says, "Then Jonah prayed to Adonai his God from the belly of the fish, saying," and then it goes through this prayer that's reminiscent of a psalm. And I'm not going to go through read the whole thing. That's You can do that on your own if you like, but the interesting thing that I will point out, at least it's interesting to me, is that the very end of the prayer reads, salvation is from Adonai or Yahweh. This doesn't exactly translate to Jesus's name, but it's really, really close. So if you're reading this in the original Hebrew, Jesus's name is Yahshua in Hebrew or Aramaic. And if you were reading this in Hebrew, and so I don't know how it would be pronounced in Hebrew, to be honest with you, but I do know if you see if you're familiar with Hebrew or Aramaic and you see a Yahshua, you know what that means is salvation from Yahweh, or Yahweh's salvation. And so right here you see salvation from Yahweh. So it's interesting that Jesus said, I'm going to give you the sign of Jonah, and the very end of Jonah's prayer is basically his name. So I think that's an interesting point to bring out. So this scenario here is, so Jonah gets to Nineveh. So now the word of Adonai, this is starting in chapter 3, the word of Adonai came to Jonah a second time, saying, rise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out to it the proclamation that I am telling you. And so Jonah rose and went to Nineveh according to the word of Adonai. So it's interesting too, because God's the God of second chances, right? It just starts over. I mean, we're going to forget all that stuff that you just did, right? And Jesus is second chance, right? So it's after the tomb event, right? The resurrection has happened. And we're not going to think about what it was like before. Now you got the next chance. Now let's begin again, right? That's what I see here. And so Jonah goes and he walks through the city of Nineveh, and he is basically given what seems like the type of, you ever see those guys in the street? I mean, I don't know if this is how it was or not, but the end is near, with a sign or whatever. And that's kind of the way it seems to me, The end is near. You guys need to pack up. You guys are going to die soon. But what's interesting here is that after he gets done doing this, chapter 5 says the people of Nineveh believed God and called for a fast and wore sackcloth, from the greatest of them and to the least of them. And I tell you what, just understanding the way socioeconomics and politics, tends to split everybody apart, the idea that they unified under the mission of humility, you can see why God would have relented what he had planned for them. And so you see here also this idea that this Jew is bringing about this restoration to the Gentile kingdoms, to this Gentile kingdom that's representative of, at the time of Jonah, I think Nineveh would have been, it's similar to saying New York City, and so this, you could possibly correlate this to the time of the Gentiles, right? When it talks about until the time of the Gentiles is complete. And you can see how, Jonah has come out of the belly. Jesus has come out of the tomb. The Gentiles have repented. The Gentiles fear Yahweh. have looked to Yahweh, and so you see that corollary taking place here, and so you just continue on here, and it says here, verse 10, just to put the exclamation point on, it says, when God saw their deeds, that they turned from their wicked ways, God relented from the calamity, and he said he would do to them, and he did not do it. And so that brings to mind that Second Chronicles. I don't know why I don't have it memorized, but if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evil ways, and I will hear and heal their land. And so you see, this is what God does, right? He's just waiting on us to turn, and he's calling out to us, and he's constantly sending people. I mean, I don't, just because we hear about certain ones in the Bible, I truly believe God's always talking to us, and I think we're just so obtuse, we just not good at listening at all. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So this is chapter 4, and this is in the end chapter of Jonah. But so it's a short book, but it's interesting how this happens, and why I think this dovetails really nicely into what Jesus may have been hinting at when he spoke the way that he did in regards to the Pharisees in Matthew 12. So right here, verse 1, it says, but it greatly displeased Jonah, and he resented it. So he prayed to Adonai and said, please, Lord, was not this what I said when I was still in my own country? That's what I anticipated, fleeing to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and full of kindness, and relenting over calamity. So please, Adonai, take my soul from me, because better is my death than my life. And yet Adonai said, is it good for you to be so angry? It's just interesting that the way that God talks to him like that. And it's always how God seems to talk. He's always asking you a question, And you think about what's happened here, and this is, the people have repented, and they've turned to the God of the Jews. And you would think that Jonah would be happy with that, but he's clearly not. He wanted them to be destroyed. And the whole reason why he didn't want to go was he didn't want to give them the word to begin with. He wanted them to continue in their sin and be destroyed. Because if you remember the way that it started off in verse 1, it says, rise to that great city, for their evil has risen before me. And I'm sure God didn't even need to say that to Jonah. Jonah was well aware of the evil of Nineveh. And so he wanted them to suffer. He wanted them to die. He wanted them out of the way. And, my first thought is to condemn Jonah, but I think this is something that we are all susceptible to. As a Christian, I struggle sometimes with seeing the degradation in our country and in America, and seeing like stuff that comes out of Hollywood and DC, and just the godlessness, that the filthiness that gets passed off as entertainment, and just the confusion that it's causing everybody. Like, we just keep slipping further and further down into this degraded state. And so, like, just to pick on Hollywood a little bit, so wouldn't it be nice, kind of just like, if it, they'd kind of deserve it, you know. Um, but wouldn't it be even nicer if they repented and instead of destroying your enemy, they actually became an ally? You know, it's just human nature, I think, for us to, to want that sort of justice. And so it's also interesting, we often hear this criticism of God in the Old Testament that that's the type of God he is, that he's wrathful and judgmental. And it's not true. It's not true at all. Here in Nineveh, it was purely because of their sin had risen before him. And so that's something to keep in mind. God's always wanting us to repent. And so the other thing, I think, you can read a little bit more into this, and I think I'll probably just end it here. But this idea that uh, this spirit that Jonah had at this time is the spirit that Jesus was speaking about here. That's the spirit that the Pharisees of the time had as well. Understand that if you go back into the New Testament and some of the interplay between Jesus and the Pharisees is most heated because he would compare the Gentiles favorably. I mean, the parable of the Good Samaritan is probably the most prominent example of this, where he basically showed that the Jewish people were the ones who didn't care about their own, but it was the Samaritan who helped. And I think that hurt the pride of the Jew at the time that heard that, if that's what they cared about. We need to be careful that we're Christians first, that we're God-fearing first, that we're servants of God, servants of the Most High first, and that we are not American or whatever nationality even. You know, we're, right now our country, America's split racially, and, a lot of us are white first, black first. We need to be Christian first. We need, who cares about what our color of our skin is? That's just ridiculous. And we see that problem here, right? Jonah would have rather seen them die because they're them and he's not them. And their culture's filthy and they have problems and and that they're dealing with. He wants them to wipe them out. Isn't that an attitude that we see today going on? That people would rather attack each other. And this is something that plagued the Jews at this time. This idea that Jesus didn't come to save them from Roman occupation is a theme in the New Testament for why the Jewish leaders didn't accept Jesus. Jesus came and condemned them and said, hey, you need to restore your relationship with God. But Jews at the time, they think they're the holy ones, They're the seed of Abraham. They don't need to be restored. Who are you to tell us we need to be restored? It's this pride, this national pride that we all can be capable of. And for the Jews, it cost them understanding and seeing who the Messiah was. And to be honest, it still is an issue for them. But it's not them that only are the ones that have this problem. We all have this same problem. And pride gets in the way of us really seeing ourselves for who we are. And God needs us to be humble. So there it is. And so hopefully you stuck around for the whole thing, and maybe you got something out of it. And if you did, if you liked it, share it and comment and all that jazz. So Till next time.